WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. Still broadcasting in high mono sound at AM 1570 WNST. Make sure you're setting the dial through the holidays and following along at Baltimore Positive. We're going to be doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour this week and next week. We're going to be at Fadley's on Friday with my dear friend Dan Rodricks. I'll have some Maryland scratch-offs from Raven scratch-offs from the Maryland Lottery, as well as our friends at Goodwill and Window Nation, bringing these things together. And then, of course, next Thursday, celebrating 31 years on the air at Costas in my homeland of Dundalk with Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The only Hall of Famer from Dundalk is Gina Schock from the Go-Go's. She'll be with us, as well as some friends at Hammerjacks who are doing a documentary on the old rock and roll days. I'll let my rock and roll hair out. I got to know this guy at Radio Row's. This will be our 28th year doing Radio Row. If I'm still invited in Phoenix, we'll find out shortly. I'm expecting to do Radio Row. I've done them all except one, the Tampa one a couple years ago when the plague was going on. This guy's been at the last, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think he was like 12 years old when I met him. I think he's 18 now. He has his own show down in Houston, and I've never really had him on the show. Maybe at the Super Bowl I think we've hung out, but I've been meaning to have him on for a long, long time. He has been nationally syndicated at a young age. Kind of reminds me of me from Dundalk many years ago. We welcome Jake Asman onto the program for the first time. What's up, dude? You losing your voice today? You're getting older? You getting jaded? What's happening with you, brother?
Well, I'm only 18, Nestor. So, I'm hoping I still have, this voice that could carry me for at least a couple more years, right?
How old are you now?
I'm 28.
I said to my wife, he might be 30 now. I didn't know. I knew you're getting a little older. Give everybody your background, because I know that you were one of the hardest working guys I saw on Radio Row, and I don't do a lot of, kissing of asses around here. And I got to know you years ago, and I'm like, this kid reminds me of me, like here hustling. He's here at 8 in the morning. He's here at 11 o'clock at night. And you're one of the young people I know that I've met, and I get resumes from people and all that really was, you're born to do this. You were going to do this no matter what. And I admire that about you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nestor. It's funny, I met you. So I live in Houston. I do afternoon radio now here at Houston for ESPN 97.5. But the first time I ever was in Houston was at that Radio Row for the Patriot Falcons Super Bowl. That's when I met you for the first time. Our tables right next to each other. We're like, who's this loud, energetic guy that's constantly going live? WNST, and we're like, what's WNST? It's like, we never stop talking. I'm thinking to myself, wow, this guy is awesome. I remember we had you on the show, and we've obviously stayed in touch ever since. So I appreciate you.
Are you still national, or what are you doing? Because you were doing fill-in, you were doing sporting news, you were doing all sorts of things at one point.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of different things. So I moved down to Houston in July of 2018. I originally was brought down to work for SB Nation Radio and then kind of fill in, be a reporter for ESPN 97.5. The parent company that owned both stations is Gal Media. So Gal Media owned SB Nation Radio, which has since been rebranded to Sports Map Radio. So my first 3 years down here, I was doing a syndicated show on SB or Sports Map Radio. And, from there,
kind of. But that wasn't a focus on Houston sports, right? Right. Okay.
Correct. That was national. And then the opportunity came about a year and a half ago when ESPN 97.5, ESPN Houston was redoing its lineup. The opportunity was presented to me about, going local and doing a drive time show. And I said, absolutely. I grew up in New York. I grew up listening to FAN and ESPN New York, Mike and the Mad Dog, the Michael K Show. Like, local radio is always where I wanted to be because of that connection you get to the audience. So the chance to do radio in the fourth biggest U.S. city, no brainer. So I've been doing local for the last year and a half.
Astros still cheating, or no? Did they figure it out this year?
Yeah, it's tough doing local radio down here, Nestor. I'm a Yankees fan, so all the Astros do is kick my team's ass, and I got to talk about them, obviously. So, look, the perception is always going to be they're doing something right, but I think they've proven over these last 6-7 years that, yeah, they cheated in 2017. No doubt they admitted to it, but they have a great team, and a lot of the players on that 17 team aren't even on the team anymore. There's like 4 players left. So I think as much as everyone hates the Astros outside of Houston, you have to acknowledge they are a damn good baseball team.
Well, we've taken their model, right? I mean, we have Mike Elias here and the Astro Ball and all that, cheating aside, Sigma Dell. We're getting closer. I definitely want to talk some football with you, but on the baseball side, obviously the Aaron Judge story earlier in the week that he might be going to San Francisco. He grew up a Giants fan. There were reports that were made on the internet and like whatever, but the Yankees never lose a guy that they want to keep, and that's really the original sin of baseball. And I go back to the early '90s before you were born, young man. I'll be 31 years on the air on Tuesday, so I literally have been on the air longer than you've been alive. But one of the big issues, and you can appreciate this doing this every day for a living, especially when you talk payroll to somebody like you, sophisticated, young but sort of an old spirit and been around baseball, you can't be a baseball fan without understanding how disparate the payrolls are and saying, well, how did hockey get a salary cap and basketball gets a salary cap and football lives by the salary cap, right? And it allows the Bills to be good. It allows every team, even the Bengals get to go to the Super Bowl, which I found still a little bit like a wet dream last year that actually happened. And it could happen again. That kid's pretty good. But the baseball side of this, in 1991, 92, 93, I went on the radio. We had the big strike in 94. We were the princes then, not the pauper. Camden Yards on this shoulder over here. Camden Yards is brand new. It's printing more money than the Yankees had, more money than the Red Sox had at that point, because they didn't have this two cities, Baltimore, Washington, 3.5 million people going to the games, all of that. And we were the ones buying Alomar and Key, and every year signing 5 free agents and having press conferences every day, signing future Hall of Famers, Palmeiro, all that stuff. And I would always go on the radio and say, wow, what would it be like to be in Cleveland? What would it be like to be in these other places where these teams stink and they can't sign players and they don't have any money? And they never fixed it. They never tried to fix it. These taxes and luxury, all of that, it was just a way for smugglers to smuggle money down in Florida and Miami and whatnot. And here we are, it's still all these years later. Did anybody really think they were going to sign Aaron Judge? I mean, I guess that's my point. It's like, do you really think that they were going to let him get away?
I never did. And even after the John Heyman tweet, where he's talking about Arson Judge going to the Giants, I still kind of felt like, really? Like, I just couldn't picture him playing for a different team. I mean, he bet on himself and he had more leverage than any player has ever had over a team in free agency. I mean, he's beloved by the fan base. He's obviously going to be named the captain now that he has signed long term. He's the most beloved player they've had since Derek Jeter, just telling you how Yankee fans feel about Aaron Judge. So I just never saw the scenario where he would leave. I guess it was possible once you get the free agency, but you said it yourself, Nestor. Any player the Yankees have wanted to keep, they have always re-signed. People bring up Robinson Cano. They didn't want Robinson Cano. They offered him 7. He took 10 from Seattle. They were cool with letting him walk. Any other homegrown Yankee that they always wanted to keep, they've been able to do it. So I wasn't shocked that they were able to get this done, despite it feeling like there was a moment where maybe he was going to go to San Francisco.
Well, we sit here in Baltimore and say, well, we got better and we're going to get into free agency. And the fans are just myopic. I mean, they're not the remainder of the Orioles fan base. When I go out on the Oriole Twitter, it's like, have you been watching this? I mean, Manfred has to pick which of the kids is actually owning the team this week at the press conferences, at the owners' meetings this week. And I'm thinking, they don't have any money. They don't want to spend any money. All the money's in their pockets or in the mattress or daddy's mattress here. The Chris Davis thing still has such a the Glenn Davis thing from before your birth has bad taste in the mouth here when we dealt Schilling and like the Schilling Harnish deal and all the stuff that went on then, Steve Finley, all of that. I would say where the Orioles are is fighting in this world of having to compete with Aaron Judge and just hoping that the Gunnar Hendersons and the 1-1s and Adley Rutschman, the Orioles are getting better, but they're never going to play that game. They played it 30 years ago, but they're never going to play that game again. And I think that's unfortunate for baseball, that, the biggest free agent goes out and can't really sniff the market, because the Yankees or the Dodgers will do whatever they need to do. So will the Red Sox, even though they've stopped spending money, but they could if they wanted to. Mookie Betts isn't there out of their own idiocy, quite frankly.
Yeah, no doubt. And you add the Mets to that with Steve Cohen buying the team. He's the richest owner in all of sports. I mean, here would be my question to you, though. Like, the Orioles, I understand they're not the Yankees, they're not the Red Sox, they're not the teams that you mentioned, but don't you feel like they could spend some money and increase their payroll? Like, to me, they have a young team. Wouldn't you want to solidify it with 1 or 2 big name free agents? Like, they overachieved dramatically last year. They seemingly have a good young core. Is it crazy to think they could go out there and spend some money? I mean, you got the San Diego Padres, offering Aaron Judge $400 million. Trey Turner took less money to go to Philly than he did if he wanted to go to the Padres. So maybe it could be done where I'm not saying Baltimore is ever going to be, the Yankees or the Red Sox, but maybe the Orioles could start to spend a little more money here as their team gets closer to actually having a chance to compete for a playoff spot.
Well, dude, you said Padres, right? Like our guy is playing for them, right? And they had a lot of fun this year. And I almost went up to Philly and saw some of the games. I mean, I dusted off my Gwynn jersey, my mustard and brown. I was out feeling good about it. Like there is a sense that that's a franchise that's at least trying.
Right.
I just want to see, are you trying? I was out in Oakland for Pearl Jam back in May. There was a game going on in the same parking lot, and there was 1,800 people at the baseball game. And I'm thinking, this is what happens when you stop trying. And I think there's definitely a sense in all of sports, right? In the NBA, you're either trying or you're tanking, right? And the tanking part of it, I mean, the Orioles went through 4 or 5 years of that, saying when it's time to go, we'll go. They're not going to get in an Aaron Judge sweepstakes or a Verlander. They're just not going to spend that kind of money, even though they like to play poor. We're small market. They like to talk about themselves as being small market, and then they spend to small market, and they tell their fans, we're going to have to do this a different way so we can make more money. And that's been going on here really since McPhail came to Baltimore. I mean, Peter was doing stupid stuff, spending money on the David Seguis and all that. But once McPhail came here, I think McPhail showed, Mike Flanagan told me, McPhail showed Angelos, hey man, just make the money. They'll eat hamburger. You don't need to feed them steak. Yankees fans need filet mignon.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, look, New York's a star town as well. And if you let the greatest star in your city walk, what does that say about the Yankee brand? A brand that has not won a championship since '09, hasn't even been back to the World Series since then. So
we keep forgetting that. I'm glad when Yankees fans remind us of that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, but look, you got to call it how you see it, right? Like you just gave Brian Cashman a 4-year extension. Yankee fans went nuts over that. Could you imagine in the same week they re-signed the GM who has not brought this franchise a championship going on 13 years? You let the greatest homegrown player since Derek Jeter walk? Like they couldn't do it. So did they overpay? Sure. But do they need to keep Aaron Judge and name him captain? Yeah. And you worry about, the last couple of years of that deal down the line. You're the Yankees. Who cares?
Jake Asman is my guest for one of the first times. He's been doing sports radio down in Houston for a number of years. Got to know him at the Super Bowl. He's a good dude. You can follow him out on Twitter. The young guns of the sports radio. What's the future of sports radio? I mean, do you still take phone calls and stuff? I mean, I only ask because I've done this 31 years as of this week. I haven't taken phone calls in the modern era, although I sit with all sorts of guests and people in the community, and I'm available on Twitter, and I'll argue with you on social media or whatever. I just don't think it's great radio to fire the coach and bench the quarterback. I mean, Jake, I'm in Baltimore, right? And believe me, I have my own ethical and integrity struggles with the Ravens. Big time, who they are, what they stand for, how much they lie. Harbaugh's lying about Lamar's injury this week. I'm convinced of that because they lie about everything. So there's all of that. But there is this point where firing the coach and firing the general manager when the team's 8-4. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like the Ravens are 8-4. This is not a bad gig at this point, but it's certainly, fans can be crazy. And I know that. I'm just wondering in 2023, as we're getting close to, who sits on hold 40 minutes to tell Jake Asman that the Yankees suck? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, it's definitely evolved. I mean, you could even see it over the last 5 years. I think sports radio is always going to have a place, Nestor. People just consume it differently. What I've really noticed is, the callers aren't going to want to wait on hold as much, but we have a text line that is constantly going off during our show. And honestly, I'm kind of with you. A lot of calls are whack. Like, unless I know it's a good caller, that we have a pretty good relationship with the callers that call into our show. Like, I know, hey, Gary in the Heights is going to have a good take. He's not going to be too long-winded. He'll get to his point, and we can react off that. We'll take his call. But I think it's lazy radio just to be like, all right, here's our monologue, and then we just take calls and that's it. Like, I think sports radio, you gotta go deeper than that. We use the text line. We'll read tweets if it's appropriate or could add to the show, but we're not trying to like force feed, a caller for the sake of just taking a caller. I just think that's outdated radio. It could be done. I mean, you listen to any radio show in New York, it's still pretty much monologue calls. The phone lines are going to be filled up when you're in a city that big. But for us, we try and stay away from just, all right, here's the topic, and then we take calls. So, but I think, I mean, a good caller can enhance the show. You just got to be smart about what callers you go to and make sure you screen them out and get the good ones on the air.
Do you have King Albert in a can? You better let him out in case he smothers. I I've taken tens of thousands of phone calls, right?
Yep.
So, and part of the art form for me was listening to the Grease Man on 101, DC 101 when I was a kid. That he made every phone call like good. You know what I mean? That you could pick on the caller, have a good time, poke at it or whatever. But I grew up in that. I don't do it anymore. And I guess I don't even think about like sports radio as a format in the way that I sort of invented it here, but it was nothing at all like what Odyssey would do or Clear Channel would do or the fan, any of those other the 2020 sports flashes. And I would always say, why are we giving people traffic updates? Like I like it's amazing. Like there were just basic sort of radio tenets about saying your name for Arbitron ratings. I remember Papa Joe Chevalier at Sporting News Radio. They would always, we were out in Chicago, was syndicated at the turn of the century. They would always say, Joe, you got to say your name. They know my goddamn name. They listen to the show every night. And that's a pretty good Papa Joe, by the way, too. Jake Asman is here. We're talking about sports radio and sports media. But for me, with Twitter and with social media just in general, I get the bar stool. You know what I mean? I hear that people are upset with Roman and I see this sort of ugliness and whatever, but I see so many comments and I think that would be a terrible phone call. That would be a terrible. I would tell that guy that guy must be drunk, like, and I think to myself, how professionals, and I think about this all the time. I mean, so far today, I've talked to Charlie Batch. I've talked to Mike Flynn, who's got a Super Bowl ring. I mean, these are the people I want to talk to and find out what they think, because I think my audience is more interested in that than Harbaugh's got to be fired. They can't sign Lamar, and then you add race, you add anger, you add politics on top of all of that. I remember back when we had Tony Banks and Trent Dilfer here, a black quarterback and a white quarterback 20 years ago, and thinking the 7-second delay and the button, oh my God. So I'm glad I'm not in the 7-second delay with my finger on the button all the time, because I just thought it was not dangerous, but just not something I would want to listen to. You know what I mean? Like I'm in a format mode now where I'm trying to create something that I really would want to listen to.
The business changed. I mean, podcasts are now more prevalent. I'll tell you what, YouTube, I believe, is also part of the future of sports radio. We have seen tremendous growth on our show just by me posting segments from our show every day on YouTube. I mean, I've been able to bring in an audience that maybe wasn't normally listening to sports radio, that they found us on YouTube. They were just looking for, interesting clips about the Astros or the Rockets or the Texans or just general NFL talk. They found our show. Now they tune in every day, or they watch us on Twitch. So sports radio's evolved. It's not what it once was, but I think people are still consuming the product. They're just doing it in different ways. They're doing it visually. They're doing it on YouTube, Twitch. They're doing it over podcasts, the stream. Like I think Nielsen is the laziest way to evaluate like a radio show, because sports radio is so much beyond just how people used to consume it back in the day.
No, there's no doubt about it. Jake Asman is my guest. He's in Houston. I called you to talk football and the Aaron Judge thing and the baseball thing and the sports media thing and our age difference and all that. Lamar, from the outside, and again, you're in Houston where the whole Deshaun Watson thing happened. I had John McLean on a couple of weeks ago after the World Series win, and we talked some football as well. Lamar and the perception of Lamar and Lamar on Twitter and give Lamar $250 million. Lamar's won one playoff game. This is the third year in a row where he's really not healthy in December. And I probably, if I were a smart guy and I was doing national radio 5 years ago, the night they drafted him, I would have said, so let me get this straight. I mean, I love the kid. I love the player. Even if you love his passing, even if whatever you love about him, he's a winning quarterback. I mean, from a record standpoint, he wins a lot of football games. He's incredibly difficult to defend. But I think to myself, he's going to run into 13 linebackers in week 1 and 9 in week 2 and 16 in week 3. And then he's going to get sacked. And that, like, what's he going to look like in week 12 every year after he's been hit 200 times and the leg goes and he gets a little older? And like, I think we're in a really weird spot with him. For me, as a fan, a supporter, I'm a Lamar supporter, to say this is why you don't give a guy $250 million if he can't play in December. Because if he can't play in December, what do you have, really?
Yeah, the Mark conversation is fascinating to me because if you're the Ravens, like, what do you do? Like, you're winning enough games, or you're not going to be picking at the top of the draft ever, like, truly reset, and you're not going to be able to find a better option than Lamar in like free agency, right? So, I think they played it right though. Like, everyone killing the Ravens for not paying him because Deshaun Watson got 252 million all guaranteed. That doesn't necessarily mean the Ravens then have to shell that out. Like, I think NFL owners look at that contract as that was an outlier. That was the Browns being the Browns because they were so desperate to get a quarterback. They paid Deshaun Watson an unprecedented amount of money. I think they played it right. I mean, is it the worst case scenario for Lamar to have to play on the tag? I mean, Dak Prescott did it. He did it. I mean, I just don't think it's the end of the world, and it kind of buys you more time for you to evaluate still what Lamar is. I love the guy. Look, I'm a Jets fan, so I'd kill to have a quarterback like Lamar Jackson and that consistency that he brings to your franchise. But I understand why the Ravens were a little hesitant just to blindly give the guy $252 million guaranteed just because Deshaun just got that from a desperate Browns team.
How you feeling about the race? I mean, the AFC stacked, right? Like, and wither the Ravens with their left tackle situation, and but if a healthy Lamar steps onto the field against Cincinnati 4 weeks from now, and they can win 3 or 4 of these games and beat Atlanta and beat Cleveland with a backup, like, if they can do all of that and get a real Lamar back, I'll hear that the Ravens can go and win a game in Kansas City. I'll hear that they can go win a game in Cincinnati or Buffalo. I don't know that I'm going to hear that. I mean, this is a real gauntlet for any of the Miami. Your Jets are on the fringe of this thing. Nashville's going to get in, right? Like, thinking that you're going to beat 2 or 3 of these teams, you better come large in January and ready to play if you think you're going to beat Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, and Patrick Mahomes in back-to-back weeks, and they're going to have to beat each other. The Bengals look really good right now. They look to be trending in a different kind of direction.
They do. Cincinnati seems like they've stabilized their offensive line ineptitude. I mean, it's weird because I still feel like the Chiefs are the team I would trust the most. But then, this is real that they can't beat the Cincinnati Bengals, so they match up with the Kansas City again. I mean, it shouldn't surprise anyone if the Bengals go out there and beat them. You can't discount Buffalo. You can't discount your Ravens. Like, the AFC is absolutely loaded. The Dolphins still are a very good team. We'll see what happens here with Tua going forward. It's a loaded conference, and the Jets obviously, it doesn't look like it because Mike White's his 5th-round pick, but he's better than Zach Wilson. Like, these 2 games have been eye-opening the way the Jets offense has been able to go up and down the field. So with that defense and the running game, and Robert Saleh seems like he's a pretty good coach so far, like, they're going to be a competitive team right now as the 7th seed. So this AFC is it seems like it's wide open with a lot of really good teams that are vying for playoff spots down the stretch.
Jake, you do some NBA? I mean, you're down in Houston. I would think, the Rockets are a real thing. I mean, we're not an NBA city here, right? So I never did a lot of NBA. I mean, the Bullets played some games up here, back in the early part of my career. One of the big thrills of my life, I was on the floor at the old Baltimore Civic Center. I think it was First Mariner Arena. They might not have been then or before Royal Farms for sure. And I got to do the announcing when the Atlanta Falcons came to town.
Nice.
So I got the Sirius, the music, the lights went down. 7'7" George Murison. So I got to do that one night. But I haven't been to an NBA game in about 7 or 8 years. The man that saved my wife's life is German. He loved Dirk Nowitzki, so I went on a whole tour. I saw Curry draining threes in Oakland, and I took him to the Garden to see Dirk Nowitzki play and like all that. But the NBA is one of those things that, like, if I was doing national sports radio, I'd have to really bone up on the NBA because I'm I'm lost in the jerseys. When I see the 2 teams play, and this is an old guy get off my lawn, I don't recognize the teams as much. And certainly from a player's standpoint, it's such a player's league that guys dictate where they're going to go, which I've talked about Lamar Jackson maybe dictating his way to Tampa or something like that,
Yeah, the NBA, I'm not gonna lie to you, the NBA's been tough to watch. I mean, one, I'm a Knicks fan, so they've been god awful for most of my life. So, like, that certainly doesn't help. But 2, you're right. You flip on a random game on like a Tuesday night. Like, what's the incentive to really watch it? Like, the regular season means absolutely nothing. You got star players that just dictate when they want to play, and B, who they want to play for. So it's not a great watch. Like, unless you're rooting for a team that is like a bona fide contender, I could understand why a lot of like casual sports fans are like, I'm good. I'm just gonna wait till football, or I'm just gonna, follow maybe hockey. I'm gonna get into, MLB when the season's on. So I know the NBA is incredibly popular, but it feels like it's the stars that remain popular, and like people being like diehard fans of teams has lessened. They just like follow wherever their favorite star player goes.
Yeah, I just watching like a Sacramento Portland game. Like I just and I'm not a gambler like that. So and if even if I did gamble, I wouldn't even know what I was doing. Betting points in basketball and whatnot. But and you don't watch World Cup either, right? Like it is amazing. In the old days when I worked at the paper, we kept our eye on 15 different things, including professional wrestling, which is the most primary thing, of course, the most important sport of all.
That's right.
But I guess in this F1's taken off. I mean, I'm in a horse racing town where we're still trying to figure out the Preakness here, right? I mean, hockey's going on right now. We don't have a hockey team here. There are lots of folks that run around wearing red right now. I had Coach Trotz on, your guy off the island. I had him
Love
on a couple
Barry.
of weeks ago, man. Yeah, it's my dude. He sent me programs from 1990 when he was the coach here. And he said, give me your address. I'm going to send you some stuff. And he put a whole bunch of skipjack stuff together for me and sent it up to me. So I have Tim Taylor coming on this week because he played on a team. And
Nice.
he's a pro personnel director at the St. Louis Blues, which I had to Google to figure out Tim Taylor went into management, which I did not know. So this is a time of the year for me to sort of say, well, the NBA and the NHL is going on. But to your point, man, World Cup, watching Morocco play, that's not watching Sacramento and Portland on a Tuesday night from the Rose Garden.
There's a lot going on. I mean, I'm a UFC fan as well, so I'll mix that in. But it's honestly, it's tough to watch everything, and I can't even pretend to know anything about soccer. Like I watch the U.S., but the next time I care about soccer, Nestor, will be probably 4 years from now when the World Cup is in the
It's
United
only
States.
3.5 years from now because they're playing in June.
That's a good point. So I'll see you in 3.5 years. I will say my guy Christian Pulisic is a huge New York Jets fan, so he's my favorite player just based on that alone because I know nothing else about soccer.
I'm a huge Joe Douglas fan, so as long as I'm a
Me
Joe
too.
Douglas fan, I guess I'll be a Jets fan at this point. Even though I have nothing in common with Fireman Ed and a few things in common with Gary Vaynerchuk. Jake Asman is here. He is the Jake Asman Show. He's in Houston. He's become a friend. He used to be really young. I thought he was still 18. It turns out he's 28. Hey, so you've been doing sports. When was that Houston Super Bowl? Then that was
Yes,
7
that
years
was
ago.
that was 2016, I think it was, or February of, or I think it was February of 2017.
So I've only been knowing you 5 or 6 years. It feels like I've known you longer. You're an old soul, Asman. It's great having you on, man.
Nestor, this has been a ton of fun, my friend. I've been following your career forever, and I'll never forget the first time we heard you doing the show at Radio Row in Houston. We couldn't wait to talk to you, man. We love your passion for the business, and just continued with all your success, man. You kind of paved the way for a lot of us.
I'm just a troublemaker. I am Nestor. We are WNST AM 1570 Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.